At the crime scene, the homeowner's pet dog's head was riddled with gunshot wounds. Both victims died from a single gunshot wound, with no signs of struggle. No valuables were missing from the scene. Based on Inspector Luther's experience, he surmised that this type of crime was not a random occurrence, and that it was most likely committed by someone known to the victims. The file showed a woman named Alice. At 13, she entered Oxford University for advanced studies. At 18, she earned a doctorate in astrophysics. Genius and eccentricity, in a certain sense, are closely intertwined. Faced with Luther's questioning, Alice gradually shed her disguise. She admitted to hating her parents. Her words were full of provocation and contempt. Luther knew he had encountered someone exceptionally clever this time. She wanted to use a perfect crime to prove herself, but currently, the police lacked any incriminating evidence. Reluctantly, Luther had no choice but to release Alice. After the incident, Luther wondered why the police still hadn't found the murder weapon. How did Alice manage to make a pistol disappear? His colleague told him that based on the bullet trajectories at the scene, it was possible to confirm that the killer used a pocket pistol. The reason for this understatement was that the gun's body used a plastic frame. Luther suddenly understood why both victims had been shot in the head, but the dog on the ground had been hit by multiple bullets. It wasn't because the dog would attack the killer, but rather because the killer wanted to enlarge the wounds on the dog's head to the maximum extent possible so they could reach inside the dog's body and insert the disassembled gun into its stomach. Then, during the dog's cremation, they would conveniently destroy the evidence. Luther realized that Alice was unlike other criminals. She would take the most compelling evidence as a trophy and keep it for herself. To prove this suspicion, he secretly broke into Alice's house. Sure enough, among the dog's remains, he found an unmelted gun barrel. But just as he was about to leave, he noticed the elevator going up. He cautiously turned to avoid it. His intuition was right. The person who stepped out of the elevator was Alice. She didn't notice Luther behind her. Unexpectedly, Luther had called her back and displayed the trophy in his hand. This was enough to enrage Alice. She went into the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and chased after him outside. Luther stood on the overpass with a cold expression, facing the knife at his stomach without any fear. He was certain she wouldn't kill him in public. He understood that a gun barrel that had undergone high-temperature cremation was no longer valuable for forensic examination and could not be considered evidence against Alice, so he threw it into the river. He wanted to show her that she wasn't the only intelligent person in the world. She was also full of curiosity about him. She started searching for all the documents related to him. She didn't even overlook information about his wife, but what she didn't know was that she couldn't understand everything about this man based on just a few lines of paper, because he had a strange personality. At the police station, he was like a ticking time bomb. No one could truly penetrate his inner world. It was for this reason that his wife proposed a divorce. This caused him to completely explode. After venting his anger, he decided to move to the police station. He wanted to use the pleasure derived from solving cases to numb himself. But he absolutely never expected that, compared to the other difficult cases, the woman named Alice would be the most challenging to deal with. Two patrol officers lay dead in the street. The killer's shooting technique was extremely neat and decisive. From the bloodstains on the wall, it could be inferred that the killer had first disguised himself as a body sitting in the corner. Waiting for the police to discover him, he immediately opened fire. All the bullets hit vital areas. The two bullet holes in the victims' bodies were only 7 centimeters apart. It was clear the killer's marksmanship surpassed everyone present. Luther quickly received information that another police officer had been killed. He immediately led his team to the scene. This time, the killer hadn't hit any vital areas. But after examining the crime scene, Luther felt something was amiss. The killer had walked directly towards the police officers and fired at close range, yet only hit them precisely in the abdomen. But last night, he was clearly in a dark environment, using 4 shots to take down 2 police officers. How could such sophisticated marksmanship fail in broad daylight and leave anyone alive? And why were his targets all police officers? Luther was wondering, if he himself were the killer right now, what would be the best place to attack? The continuous deaths of colleagues were causing Luther's subordinate Justine to panic and worry. He even worried that he would be the next victim. At this moment, the killer sent out a live broadcast. This man, named Owen, had served in the Royal Navy SEALs. His father had also served the country. During a mission, his father accidentally committed murder and was sentenced to prison. Owen demanded that the police immediately reduce his father's sentence and give him the respect he deserved. Otherwise, he would continue his behavior. Luther immediately retrieved the prison visit video and discovered that Owen was under immense pressure while talking to his father. There were no smiles or hugs between them. Although no sound could be heard, the father seemed to be giving some kind of command to his son. So Luther decided to go to the prison to meet this man. As Luther suspected, suspected. Owen's father was a scoundrel. Everything was manipulated by him. While the two were talking, Dylan and Justine began searching Owen's father's cell. After a thorough search, they found a SIM card with only one phone number on it. The police, using telecommunications tracking, successfully located Owen's hiding place. However, Dylan harbored suspicion and distrust towards this operation. He reasoned that if a sequence of numbers was crucial, he would choose to memorize it rather than save it on a card where it could be easily discovered. But his superiors didn't want to miss any clue. After all, this case had shaken the entire city, and the pressure on him was immense. The special police force quickly surrounded the target location. Luther's team also arrived at the scene to command the operation. With a blast that shattered the door, the special forces stormed in. Everyone outside was tense. The special forces inside the house didn't spot the target. This operation by the special police team resulted in 4 deaths and 6 serious injuries. Clearly, Owen and his father knew the police's tactics like the back of their hand. That's why they deliberately left the phone card to mislead the police. But how did he manage to pinpoint the exact timing of the police's operation and detonate the bomb? Luther found evidence related to the 2 police officers who were murdered that night, and sure enough, he discovered a radio transceiver that seemed suspicious. It turned out that after Owen's actions, he had swapped one of the transceivers. He was using this to closely monitor the police's movements. To prevent further harm to the London police force, Luther made a daring decision. He approached a radio reporter to respond to the recent incident involving the murdered officers. His words were full of sarcasm and provocation towards the perpetrator. He even spoke disrespectfully to Owen's father, who was in prison. His purpose was to provoke Owen, making him the next target. Then, Luther deliberately used the transceiver to reveal his location. His superiors felt Luther had gone mad. They quickly called in a special task force to assist Luther at his location, but even the quickest would take 13 minutes. By then, Owen had already found Luther. He told Luther to put his hands over his head and leave a last will and testament. Then Owen used the butt of his gun to knock Luther to the ground. But Luther didn't panic at all because he knew Owen's weakness was his father. From childhood to adulthood, Owen had been like a puppet controlled by his father, living in the haunting shadow of his childhood. These words pierced Owen's heart. He only left one bullet in his gun to play the death wheel game. Then he pressed the gun against Luther's head and pulled the trigger. Next came the second, the third, and then the fourth. Only 2 shots remained. Luther had a 50% chance of being shot, but in the end, he was still lucky. Owen had truly decided to save the last bullet for himself. At the critical moment, Luther landed several powerful punches, knocking Owen to the ground. In this way, Luther used his strength to bring peace to all of London. The next day, Alice arranged to meet him on the overpass. She told him she had investigated everything about him, even visiting his ex-wife and her current boyfriend. She had also found someone to teach that man a lesson. Seeing the wounds on Luther's face, Alice felt a pang of sadness. Their relationship became increasingly strange. Luther had never been superstitious, but this case was truly bizarre. Mysterious messages were written in fresh blood on the walls of the house. The 32-year-old female homeowner was reported missing. When her husband returned home, only their 1-month-old daughter remained in the room. Luther suspected the killer had disguised herself as a marketing employee or a police officer. The perpetrator then used an excuse to enter the house to investigate. After confirming that the homeowner was home alone, he carried out the crime. He used some method of intimidation to abduct her. A similar case had occurred 10 years prior. Across several cases, even the details of the bloodstains on the walls were identical. The perpetrator would imprison the victim inside a freezer, extracting blood daily. Because a human body contains over 6 liters of blood, the perpetrator only extracted a small amount each time. The victim would recover within a few weeks, and this cycle repeated, allowing the perpetrator to obtain an inexhaustible supply of fresh blood. In fact, the police had already identified a suspect named Lucen back then. However, the perpetrator was very secretive, leaving the police with absolutely no clues. Due to a lack of evidence, the case was eventually forgotten. Now, Lucen is using loopholes to turn his past crimes into novels and publish them. He's become a businessman with a large following. Luther felt this case was definitely connected to Lucen, so he decided to meet him in person. Luther went to the bookstore Lucen owned, pretending to be a fan to ask for an autograph. Based on the handwriting analysis on the wall at the crime scene, the killer was likely left-handed, but Lucen signed with his right hand. Luther scoffed and turned to leave, because at that moment he was certain Lucen was the culprit. When people are driven by instinct, their first reaction is completely uncontrollable. The moment Lucen touched the book, coincidentally, his hand was his left. Lucen was very clever and had seen through Luther's true identity. That very afternoon, he convened a press conference expressing his regret over the recent disappearance of a woman. At the same time, he told the media that he was terrified because a police raid had come looking looking for him. To ensure his personal safety, he publicly clarified that the case had no connection to his novel or to himself. Lucen held the upper hand. Major media outlets vied for coverage, preventing the police from touching him. This was precisely what Luther was worried about. Knowing his identity was about to be revealed, Lucen's first instinct was to kill, to silence anyone. To eliminate any future threats, the police had to quickly find the whereabouts of the missing woman. After reviewing the previously uncovered cases, Luther discovered that the killer's disposal location was always along the canal bank, within a radius of less than 100 meters from the dock. Luther immediately suspected the killer must have a boat. He had hidden the victim on the boat, the least likely place to be discovered. He led Justine to meticulously search every boat anchored along the canal. Finally, inside an unregistered boat, they found a suspicious freezer. Luther hurriedly opened the freezer, but he was too late. The woman, who had frozen to death, was still alive. Luther was utterly disappointed. Justine immediately prepared to call the police, but Luther stopped her. Because all the police could take away now was a corpse, and there was no evidence at the scene, the killer could still remain at large. Luther understood that to deal with a vicious person like Lucen, he needed an equally capable opponent. So he sought out Alice, hoping to gain some insight from the criminal's psychological perspective. Alice encouraged him relentlessly. She told him that criminals like Lucen weren't worth mentioning. He was just like a bragging child. And now, Luther only needed to change the state of play. Luther had an epiphany. If he weren't a police officer, this game would be much more fun. Luther disguised himself as a thug and walked along the path Lucen was forced to take to meet him. The moment they passed each other, Luther punched Lucen, knocking him to the ground. He successfully obtained Lucen's blood. Immediately afterward, he and Dylan returned to the boat and smeared Lucen's blood at the scene. This would serve as evidence to arrest him. But unexpectedly, Dylan was blinded by money. He called Lucen and told him everything Luther was about to do, demanding $20,000 as payment. He informed Lucen before the police arrived at the scene. There was still an hour left for Lucen to destroy the evidence. He quickly ran to the dock, grabbed his tools, and meticulously cleaned up the scene. He quickly found where Luther had smeared the bloodstains. But just then, it turned out the police had already set up an ambush around the area. All of this was Luther's doing. This was the only way for Lucen to be punished according to the law. Afterwards, Luther went to Alice to thank her for what she had done for him. He also told her not to disturb his ex-wife's family anymore. No matter what, his wife could never return to him. Alice was somewhat relieved. It seemed his words were conveying some kind of message to her. Unexpectedly, when Luther returned to the police station, he found his ex-wife waiting there for him. She even began to apologize to him, saying that she still loved him deeply and that he had always tried to salvage their marriage. Their feelings for each other instantly ignited. But all of this was observed by Alice, who was standing opposite them. Within 5 weeks, 4 murders had occurred consecutively. The victims were all women returning home alone at night, and the cause of death was always suffocation. At the crime scenes, the items inside the victims' backpacks were neatly rearranged by the killer. There were no signs of sexual assault on the bodies, nor any intention to rob them. Combined with the 3 previous cases, the time interval between the murders was gradually shortening. It was clear he had an uncontrollable urge to satisfy himself. Luther immediately concluded that the killer had no specific motive, but rather found pleasure in committing these crimes. If the police didn't quickly apprehend him, he would likely commit more soon. Although the locations where the bodies were disposed of were far apart, they were all near industrial areas. Obviously, this required a means of transportation. The perpetrator couldn't possibly have known 4 victims simultaneously, much less abduct them on the bustling streets of London. How did he gain the women's trust to get them into his car? There's only one possibility. After nearly 2,000 hours of CCTV footage, the police finally tracked down a suspicious taxi. This vehicle was completely unfamiliar with the city's traffic, repeatedly driving into dead ends before turning around. Using the license plate number, the police quickly located the vehicle remotely. Meanwhile, the perpetrator had moved on to his next target. He lied, claiming the streets were unsafe lately. Seeing a girl the same age as his own daughter, he worried she might be in danger. He offered to give her a free ride home. Following Luther's orders, the target vehicle was successfully intercepted. However, based on Dylan and Justin's on-site questioning, it turned out that the perpetrator was a law-abiding driver for 40 years. Furthermore, it was highly likely that the license plate was faked. Finding him was like searching for a needle in a haystack. By the time the girl realized the danger, it was too late. Another woman had been harmed. This undoubtedly put immense pressure on Luther. The perpetrator possessed considerable counterintelligence skills. He had a criminal record and knowledge of the taxi industry. Soon, a suspect named Gray emerged. This man had applied to the taxi company 3 times, but had never been hired. He then worked the night shift at a repair shop, but quit 6 months ago. This man was a frequent drinker, and his mood was erratic. Most importantly, on the night the first female victim was attacked, he had been seen with her at the same bar. Dylan immediately led his men to arrest him, but the room was empty. Meanwhile, Justin found Gray's wife. He questioned her about her husband's situation. She was furious, believing Gray was out causing trouble again, so she pretended to go to the restroom, secretly called him, and questioned him about what was happening. Justin sensed something was wrong, so he went into the restroom and snatched the phone. Gray, realizing his identity had been revealed, became enraged and lost his temper in the street. Even when she was taken to the police station, she didn't know what her husband had done outside. When she saw each photograph, she was shocked and horrified to realize her husband had committed a crime. The necklace she was wearing was a birthday gift from him, given to her not long ago. Its owner was the fourth victim in the photos. She completely collapsed, unable to believe that her seemingly honest husband was a murderous monster. In reality, Gray had a physiological disorder, and they had long since divorced. Gray had threatened her life, which is why they were reluctantly living together. Luther immediately felt uneasy upon hearing this. He asked if she had a new boyfriend. Luther knew that criminals have extremely strong possessive desires. Before being caught, they would eliminate all obstacles. The man who was dating Gray's wife would certainly be Gray's final target. Sure enough, when the police called the man, no one answered. After reviewing the call log, Justine discovered that the man was very disreputable. The last call he made was, of course, to arrange a home service. Luther immediately concluded that the man had been targeted, because once a service was arranged, the phone would definitely have to be kept switched on. The biggest danger now was whether the woman he was supposed to meet had arrived. Luther quickly dispatched officers to the target's residence and tried to contact the woman providing the service through her phone. Luther introduced himself and told the woman to listen carefully and not to speak. She had to keep smiling. He asked if she could think of a way to leave the house now, or if not, to find a safe place to hide. The police were on their way. The terrified woman, like a madwoman, ran into the bathroom. At this moment, Gray outside also revealed his true, vicious nature. He kept banging on the door with all his might. Seeing the freshly wrapped corpse, the woman became even more distraught. She began screaming for help incessantly, but there was no movement outside the door. She heard the sounds coming from outside. The hole in the door was getting bigger and bigger. She watched Gray about to break down the door and rush in. Just then, Luther had Gray's wife come to the scene. He used her as bait so the police could better control the situation. Sure enough, after seeing his wife, Gray became like a child. But after seeing the police outside, his dark side was awakened once again. He even taunted the police. Dylan and Justin quickly subdued him. Thus, the murderous monster was successfully apprehended. But Gray's wife, under the intense shock, had also lost her mind. She picked up the hammer from the ground, chased after him, and violently struck him on the head. She used this method to release all the pressure from her previous life. Luther was unable to participate in this entire process because he himself was plagued by trouble. He was undergoing an investigation at the police station. During an operation to apprehend a suspect, he accidentally slipped and was left dangling from the ceiling of a well. This criminal had harmed countless young women. He begged Luther to pull him up, but Luther, who had always hated evil like an enemy, chose to ignore him. Unexpectedly, the suspect didn't die and regained consciousness. His testimony would undoubtedly end Luther's career as an inspector, but there was one person who wouldn't let this happen. How could she stand by and watch the man she loved be dragged down into the abyss? Alice, disguised as a doctor, resolutely brought an end to everything. In the future, Luther would also need to be caught between his wife and this woman, using the same resolute method to make a choice. The couple had been intimate moments before, but soon the husband went directly to the police station. What he held in his hand was his wife's tongue. The kidnappers' purpose was clear. They demanded 18 high-quality diamonds from the husband. The man, thanks to his business of selling counterfeit paintings, had significantly increased his wealth. After quitting this business, he had converted all his assets into diamonds, preparing to flee abroad with his wife to enjoy their old age. Even after the kidnappers cut off his wife's tongue, the husband refused to reveal the location of the diamonds. It wasn't that he preferred money to his life, but that the diamonds, worth hundreds of millions, were currently hidden inside his wife's stomach. If the kidnappers knew the truth, they would surely cut open the wife's stomach on the spot to take the diamonds. The kidnappers didn't realize that the person they were kidnapping was the very money they wanted. But besides this couple, who else knew about the diamonds? That became the crucial point. According to the man's description, he had exchanged the diamonds through an intermediary named Bill. The kidnappers went straight to the point. Obviously, Bill couldn't escape his connection to this kidnapping. Now, there was only 1 hour left to pay the ransom. Immediately, the police split into two groups. Dylan was in charge of finding Bill. Luther led a team to stake out the ransom location to see if there was any opportunity to contact the kidnappers. To avoid arousing suspicion and harming harming the hostage, Luther, disregarding his superior's warnings, retrieved the real diamonds worth £3.5 million from the evidence room to use as bait. Following the kidnapper's instructions, the man put the diamonds in a paper bag and threw it into the trash can. The target quickly appeared, but after the kidnappers opened the bag, they found it empty. Sensing something was wrong, the two fled. The police immediately took action. Justin apprehended one of the kidnappers, a woman. The other man disappeared. Luther never imagined that his husband was a man in human form but a beast in human form. He abandoned his kidnapped wife, took the diamonds provided by the police, and chose to flee. Luther was even more surprised to learn that Dylan was the mastermind behind this kidnapping. It turned out that Dylan had been colluding with criminals for years. Even Bill, the man the police were looking for, was acting on Dylan's orders. Bill's nephew was in charge of tracking down those who were extorting money from criminals. Dylan used his position to help him clean up the mess that followed. But Dylan's principle was that no murders should occur. They should have gotten the diamonds and everything would have been settled. Unexpectedly, among the people Bill's nephew apprehended, one thug suddenly broke free. Not only did he abduct a woman, but he also cut off her tongue. The situation escalated. Dylan couldn't clean up the mess. He immediately called Bill's nephew, Jock, and told him that the situation was no longer about money. They had to quickly return the woman. The woman had diamonds in her body. If the thug found out and committed murder, everyone would be in danger. Luther was very upset because he had lost the diamond evidence. At this moment, his ex-wife showed up at his door to cause more trouble. She told him that their reminiscing about the past that night was just a momentary impulse. Her current boyfriend, Mark, treated her very well, and she didn't want to hurt Mark. She hoped Luther could understand her and that it would be better for them to part ways amicably. These words once again enraged Luther. He couldn't even remember how many panes of glass he had shattered by then. Meanwhile, good news arrived from Justine's side. They had successfully located the hostages and confirmed the kidnapper's identity. Strangely, the kidnapper had no tattoos on his face. At this point, Jack, following Dylan's orders, decided to lead the hostages away. Unexpectedly, Danny blocked the door. Ahead was a dead end. Just then, Danny got out of the car. When Luther saw the severed hand lying on the hood, he realized the kidnapping had escalated. Jack's fingers had been cut off joint by joint and scattered on the ground. Clearly, before his death, he had endured brutal torture without confessing. Sure enough, the $2 billion worth of diamonds found in the hostage's stomach had been taken by Danny. The only remaining clue for the police was Bill. Immediately, both Danny and Bill were added to the wanted list. Luther's intuition had always been sharp. During their conversation, he sensed something was off with his colleague. Dylan, usually calm, was unusually anxious. His body swayed back and forth, his eyes constantly darting around. Only Dylan himself knew that things had reached a point of no return. Once the crime was exposed to the public, he would certainly face punishment, so he hurried to Bill's hiding place. Dylan, a police officer with many years of experience, knew that the only way he could silence the criminal permanently was through one method. Meanwhile, Luther also began investigating Danny's whereabouts. From the evidence of the female kidnapper, he found a passport. Justine said that in this area, every forged passport had a unique mark made by the forger. Luther quickly found the passport forger. Sure enough, Danny had come to him not long ago to order a passport. Moreover, the delivery date hadn't arrived yet. The meeting place was set at the Renaissance Hotel. But just as Luther was about to leave, he suddenly remembered something the man had said earlier. It turned out that even before Luther arrived, Dylan had taken a similar photograph and gone to see this man, with the intention of quickly finding Danny to kill him and silence him. Luther immediately called Dylan and told him not to do it. The meeting at the fountain was just a delaying tactic. The crucial issue was who would find Danny first. After hearing noises outside the door, Danny became extremely alert. He first cocked his pistol, then took the diamonds from the drawer, ready to flee at any moment. Just then, Luther burst through the door. The two men started fighting. Luther said someone was about to kill Danny. "You have to come with me. Trust me, going to jail is more advantageous than losing your life." Luther picked up Danny's gun. He never imagined Dylan would shoot someone right in front of him. But no matter what, Luther didn't want to give up their years-long friendship. He told Dylan to relax. They could sort this out. Luther was going to arrest Danny, and yet Danny was resisting with a gun. Therefore, Luther took essential action. This was as simple as that to make Dylan relax. After Luther finished speaking, he handed the gun back to Dylan. Unexpectedly, at that moment, a waiter happened to walk in to clean. Dylan saw the figure at the door and assumed it was Luther setting up an ambush. He immediately fired towards the back of the door. Dylan took advantage of the chaos to steal the diamonds from Danny's bag and quickly escaped from the hotel. The killer died on the spot and the diamonds were gone. Luther remained silent about the portrait of the killer that the waiter described. Because of this case, he was suspended from his job for disciplinary action. The only thing that could comfort Luther was that his former runaway husband, who had had been arrested by Justin while working as a diamond appraiser, had successfully recovered the evidence from the police. The abandonment by his ex-wife and Dylan's transformation forced Luther to start his life anew. He no longer believed in love or friendship. Everything was betrayal. But perhaps he forgot that there was one woman who would never abandon him. Everything she did was to abandon him. Alice had always been cold-blooded. Before meeting Luther, she had never believed in love. In Luther's moment of utter shock, Alice bravely chose to confess her feelings. She tried to use this method to pull the man she loved out of his abyss. And at this moment, Luther finally understood Alice's intentions. He had once rejected this woman from afar. Now, he had completely followed his heart, making the right choice. But compared to Alice's love, there was someone who hated Luther to the core. Dylan still believed that Luther had betrayed him. Now he had no other path to take. He approached Luther's ex-wife under the pretext of visiting. However, she never imagined that an old friend she'd known for years would pull out a gun. Dylan threatened her, telling her to call Luther and not to tell him he was there. Hearing her voice, Luther naturally sensed something was wrong. He frantically tried to run back home. When Luther arrived, he found only the cold, lifeless body of his ex-wife inside. He was heartbroken and didn't want to live anymore. The police were already on their way. Seeing the shattered and broken furniture, Luther knew he had to leave quickly. Dylan had arranged everything before leaving. Luther's hot temper was well known, and the strained marital relationship was the trigger. By the time the police stormed in, his hands were stained with fresh blood. That would certainly become the best evidence proving he murdered his ex-wife. And the events unfolded exactly as Dylan had predicted. The arrest warrant for Inspector Luther was quickly circulated throughout the police station. With no other option, Luther could only turn to Alice for help. Soon, bad news arrived. Justin secretly called Luther, saying that the police near the crime scene had successfully located the gun, the evidence. Dylan leaving the gun behind must have had a purpose. When Luther recalled the events at the hotel that day, he realized this gun would become irrefutable evidence, proving he murdered his ex-wife. Because it had long been covered in his fingerprints, this case involved an internal police officer. To prevent the evidence from being destroyed, the superintendent decided to escort it back to the police station. Luther understood the police investigation process very well. Once the fingerprint analysis and DNA matching were complete, he would be in an undeniable position. So he and Alice prepared their equipment. They decided to steal the evidence mid-journey. They cornered the police car, forcing it to stop. Alice smashed the car window, successfully subduing the suspect. To avoid arousing suspicion, Justin told Luther to punch him hard in the stomach. The crucial evidence was successfully destroyed, buying Luther more time. At the police station, Dylan was on pins and needles. Once Luther was cleared of suspicion, the police would turn their attention to him. Dylan called Luther, his voice filled with remorse and grief. He begged Luther for forgiveness, saying that everything was not what he wanted to see. He hoped to see Luther one last time. After the two men had clarified everything, he would go to the police himself to confess. Immediately afterward, Luther went to the meeting place. Because they were no longer as close as before, meeting again felt incredibly strange. Luther felt very uncomfortable. What hurt him even more was Dylan's sudden accusation that he suffered from schizophrenia, claiming that he had murdered his ex-wife and was now trying to frame Dylan. Unexpectedly, Luther burst into laughter upon hearing this. It turned out Dylan had already deployed a large special forces unit around the area. Dylan's phone call to Luther was also to force him to reveal himself. His insistence on not wearing a bulletproof vest during the mission was also a way of putting himself in danger. While Dylan was trying to provoke Luther, he had a sniper ready to shoot Luther dead with a single shot in an emergency. But Luther had already seen through everything. Luther leaned close to Dylan's ear and told him that the reason he had come to see him was because Dylan had hidden the $2 billion worth of diamonds in his locker at the police station. Luther had found Mark to help him. He told Mark to use the excuse of taking a statement to gain entry to the police station. Then, he pretended to go to the restroom, secretly sneaking into the locker room to steal the diamonds. These diamonds were enough to prove Dylan's identity as a corrupt police officer. His criminal act was exposed. Dylan relentlessly provoked Luther, who had completely lost his temper. He pulled out a knife, preparing to stab Dylan. Sensing the situation was wrong, Dylan ordered the sniper on the upper level to open fire. At that moment, Justin, who was nearby, rushed in. Luther took advantage of the chaos and fled into the tunnel. The special forces ambushing nearby also quickly reported their actions. Fortunately, Luther had planned his escape route in advance. He made his way through the tunnel, slipping through the iron fence, and finally hiding in Alice's car trunk. Their escape was successful. Justin, for interfering with the operation, was arrested on the spot. Back at the police station, Dylan checked the locker as soon as possible. Sure enough, the diamonds inside had been stolen. But Dylan was cunning. He had installed a mobile camera inside the locker. After extracting the video footage, he was able to pinpoint Mark's location location. He then used the system to track Mark's phone location. Dylan retrieved the hunting rifle hidden in the car trunk. This time, he was ready for his final plan. Following the directions, Dylan drove straight to the train station. Sure enough, Dylan spotted Mark ahead. He raised his hunting rifle and chased after him. At that moment, Luther snatched the rifle and pointed it directly at him. With death imminent, Dylan once again displayed a fake expression and repeatedly apologized to Luther. He admitted to killing Luther's ex-wife. He also admitted to being truly desperate and unwilling to do so. He begged Luther to spare his life. But this time, Luther no longer believed Dylan's devilish words. He recorded their entire conversation. Dylan, consumed by rage, revealed his true nature. He began spewing foul language, even claiming to have known Luther's ex-wife. Luther worried that Dylan would lose control and kill Dylan, so he threw down his gun. Then, he used one hand to tightly grip Dylan's neck, making Dylan feel the agonizing pain that Luther's ex-wife had endured before her death. Luther only stopped when Dylan was on the verge of suffocation. Dylan pointed his gun at his own head. Seeing the murderer of his wife still defaming her innocence, he could no longer control his emotions. Along with the resounding sound of gunfire, Luther's story in the first season also came to an end. He understood that when the police stormed in, Alice would be the first to be taken away. How could he ensure that this woman, who had helped him countless times, would not suffer any harm? This film has come to an end. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and see you again.